When posed with the question, which is more of a threat to America's security and safety, domestic gun violence or terrorism, we believe that domestic gun violence poses a much larger threat to the security of Americans. As this graph shows, there are many more deaths caused by gun violence than by terrorism. The definition of terrorism that we find to be true is the use of violence and intimidation in the pursuit of political aims. And the definition of gun violence we find to be true is violence committed with the use of a gun, firearm, or small arm. We assume that the typical American could believe that terrorism may seem like a larger threat to his or her safety, since it is something that is largely publicized and discussed with great weight. But statistics prove this opinion to be incredibly incorrect. As can be seen in this bar chart, in the past decade there have been a mere 24 deaths from terrorism in the U.S. compared to a terrifying 280,024 deaths from gun violence. This dramatic difference in deaths easily proves the point that gun violence is a much larger issue at the moment. When we take a closer look at murders in America, as we can see in this bar chart, a huge majority of the murders are done with guns. The more restrictions the U.S. can put on guns, the better, because that will lead to a reduction of domestic gun deaths in our country. When we think about the people who actually commit crimes and the people we think commit crimes, there is a huge disconnect. Americans typically tend to wrongly stereotype, specifically Muslims they don't know, to either be terrorists or murderers, when in reality, a shocking 57% of victims of gun violence actually knew their killer. Americans have been saying for a long time now, easy access to firearms in the U.S., along with the lack of protections like universal background screenings for gun buyers, have led to institutionalized, normalized mass violence in the country. U.S. has 5% of the world's population, but had 31% of its public mass shootings from 1966 to 2012. Except for a few outliers, this scatterplot shows that for the most part, fewer guns equals fewer deaths by gun. It is not perfect though, since there seems to be no perfect formula yet for the lack of gun deaths.
The United States is the only developed country where mass shootings or attacks, defined as 4 victims per the FBI definition, occur on a consistent basis. Gun laws in the United States, although they can vary from state to state, are extremely relaxed compared to the rest of the world. In a country like Japan, which has the lowest amount of gun-related deaths in the world, a very strict procedure is enforced upon those who wish to obtain any firearms of any kind. Under Japan's firearm and sword law, the only guns permitted are shotguns, air guns, guns that have research or industrial purposes, or those used for competitions. A lot of steps have to be taken before access to these specialty weapons is granted. One must obtain formal instruction and pass a range of written, mental, and drug tests and a rigorous background check. Owners must also inform the authorities of how the weapons and ammunition is stored and provide the firearm for annual inspection. This is why Japan has the lowest number of gun-related deaths in the world. Australia had a mass shooting in 1996, and they created a gun buyback program that reduced the number of guns in circulation by 20%. Homicides by firearm plunged 59% between 1995 and 2006. The drop in suicides by gun was even steeper, 65%. There have been no mass shootings since this gun buyback.
This side-by-side box plot shows the great difference between fatalities caused by gun violence and terrorism. The only outlier with regard to terrorism is the attacks of 2001. The amount of fatalities caused by gun violence greatly outweighs the damage caused by terrorism. Yet people possess a greater fear of terror attacks. We should rather focus to stop the senseless collateral damage that is occurring by controlling and analyzing the process of firearm possession.
This histogram illustrates the death rates in the United States by state per 100,000 citizens. The national average death rate across all states is 10.64 per 100,000 citizens, which is the highest among all developed countries and definitely the highest among nations with such a big population. The high death rates in these states were all caused by the easy access to firearms and the lack of proper regulation. To lower the death rates caused by firearms, one must go to the source, the firearms themselves. By minimizing free access to weapons and making the process of acquiring these weapons stricter, lives will be saved.
We believe that our sources are valid and vetted for a few different reasons. We believe that we drew from sources with different opinions and points of view. We understand that a source such as Wikipedia may only be reliable for things such as statistics, but Wikipedia was still helpful when figuring out basic information on these issues. The more opinionated pieces that we read were from sources such as CNN, which can typically sway more liberally, and so we took that into account when analyzing the information. Other sources we got data from were websites such as PolitiFact, and when we searched further into where the authors of those articles got their information, we found that they got it from places such as the Mass Shootings Tracker from the CDC. The United States has 200 million more guns than any other country, and it also has the most mass shootings. We believe that this poses a huge threat to Americans, especially when comparing this problem to terrorism, which, even though it is an issue that is present in our country, it currently poses a much smaller threat to Americans.